The information contained in this episode is for informational purposes only. No material is intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment.
We need a revolution. There's only one solution. I need somebody to show me the love. We need a revolution.
Hello and welcome to Inform Life Radio. I'm your host today, Bob Runnels, and I've got with me Lisa Templeton. Hi, Lisa.
Hello. Happy Friday, Bob.
Happy Friday. So we are gearing up for a great show today. Please stick around. We're going to hear from Dr. Erin Kheriaty. First, we'll get some housekeeping out of the way. Bernadette, your normal host, is going to be with us again next week. She'll be talking chemtrails. We don't normally go down too many call it conspiracy theories, but there are multiple states that have bills against geoengineering now, so we're going to hit that a little harder next week. And
and we have a bill here pending in the Washington legislature this year, filed by Rob Chase, restricting weather modification, House Bill 2222, I believe.
Great. Yep. So that'll be right on topic for us. So tune in next week. We are coming to you live on KKNW and streaming to Children's Health Defense TV and many of our Informed Choice Washington platforms. We are sponsored by the good members of Informed Choice Washington, and we encourage you to check out our website. And we do have to pay for this radio time and the the awesome assistance of the radio engineers there. So we need to pay for all that, and we could really use some extra donations. When you check out our website, it would go toward that, amongst other things. It would also go to help pay for what we're doing in Olympia. And as you might know, next week, we are beginning the legislative session. 2026. I can't believe it's already here. We've been doing this for 7 years. I've been doing this for 7 years, Lisa.
Mm-hmm. The advocacy work.
Yeah, advocacy work and a lot of Olympia stuff. I think at state level, we can make a difference. That's why I've personally joined Informed Choice Washington and kept active in that time. So with that kickoff next Monday, the legislature is going to be starting their committee meetings as soon as Tuesday. And there are bills that we'll be tracking. We'll hear more about that as we go through in our newsletter. Please check out our newsletter. We put out a Substack every week, and it keeps you up to date on what you might be doing and helping us with in Olympia. As part of our kickoff, we've decided, and Lisa did a great job organizing the background for getting all this in place, getting a grant in place as well. A Health Freedom Day in Olympia, and that's on Thursday. We will kick off the event right around noon at the north steps of the legislative building with speeches by Dr. Anik St. Martin, by Bill Sullivan from Wenatchee, who was fired from his Navy job and his captaincy, and all because of the COVID mandates at that point. So we want to hear from them. We're going to hear from legislators like Jim Walsh and John Lee. Carrie French will join us to tell her about her vaccine injury story. And we'll be reminding legislators that we are watching them. We are still passionate about health freedom, and we want you there to help us. And are we doing anything to prep for that, Lisa?
Yes, we've been doing a lot of good stuff to prep. We're super excited. We can't wait to see everybody there. We have some very cool swag that you're going to be able to wear around the Capitol to give us all a united appearance and take that home with you. What else besides the speakers, Bob?
Well, people who might not have been in one-on-one legislator meetings might be a little nervous about it. They might be legislator hesitant.
Oh, yeah. Yes, because part of the reason we're asking people to attend is because we're going to have a copy of the silver booklet. It's called By Physicians for Informed Consent. It has pretty clear-cut data on vaccines and the illnesses they are meant to target. So like Bob was saying, if you're a little legislator meeting hesitant, which I totally get, We are going to have a training session by Zoom on Sunday evening, this Sunday at 7 p.m. for about an hour and 15 minutes. And you can register for that by going to informedchoicewa.org and click events, and you'll see the registration link there. We have wonderful Amber King, who's a very seasoned advocate, to give you a short evening of some instruction and get you comfortable and confident. And while you're at the rally, you'll be able to pick up the books for your legislator and take them to deliver them. And hopefully you'll have a meeting with them. So we're asking people to contact their legislators now to book those meetings.
Thanks, Lisa. And I think that training session's at 5 p.m. Sunday night.
Oh, thank you. I'm getting my days mixed up. 5 to about 6:15.
That's right. And so we already had a successful meeting last Thursday. We will encourage you to look at the website again from our homepage, informedchoicewa.org. We have all the event details spelled out for you, what the lineup is, what you can do in the morning. There are activities on campus. If you'd like to go to a committee hearing, there is a public health topic in the Senate Health Committee. We give you parking directions. We tell you what to bring. We also remind you there's a prayer tour, a Family Policy Institute prayer tour that you can join starting at 9 a.m., which is really cool. I did it last year. We pray around the campus. We also got to see behind the scenes, and we get to go to the Treasury safe, which is not really functional anymore, but it's really cool to go behind that big iron door.
It does sound cool.
Yeah. And we'll be meeting afterwards, even if you want to come socialize with us afterwards. We've got a reservation at one of the local restaurants. So all that is covered on our website and on the event page. So please consider joining us either Sunday night for the training and then Thursday for the rally. Thank you. So let's get to our guest with no further ado. You know, this show, we might give you legal and medical advice. We're not doctors. We're not giving you advice through this show, but we are bringing on a doctor who has a lot of experience from the front lines during COVID, Dr. Kheriaty. And welcome, Dr. Kheriaty.
Thanks. It's great to be with you both.
Am I pronouncing that
appreciate it.
correctly?
Yeah, you've got it right.
Great. Yeah,
we're really honored and excited to have you here, and we want to hear about your new book and other goodies.
Great. Well, I look forward to the conversation. Where should we begin?
Well, you know, sadly, some of our listeners might not have heard about you. You really came to our attention, though, during the pandemic.
Yeah.
I think you were also published well before then.
Yeah.
But
So maybe-
you really had your voice coming out. You saw some flaws in the way that the pandemic was being executed.
Yeah, maybe I'll just begin with the story of what happened to me at the University of California, Irvine, where up until COVID started, and even during the first part of the pandemic, I was a professor in the School of Medicine and director of the medical ethics program. I had been at UCI for 16 years, 20 years if you count my residency training there in psychiatry. And as the director of the medical ethics program, I was at a committee at the UC Office of the President, which oversaw not just my branch campus, UC Irvine, but all the campuses, all 5 of the campuses that had hospitals and medical schools. And we were developing all of the COVID-related policies, some of which were ethically and publicly very sensitive, like questions such as what to do if we run out of a scarce resource, if the demand for, let's say, monoclonal antibodies outstrips the supply. How do we allocate a scarce resource like that, which, as you can imagine, is a publicly sensitive policy. And then in late 2021, after I had been doing this for the better part of 2 years, and trying to help the hospital where I worked and the university where I worked to navigate the challenges of COVID and this novel virus, the university published a draft policy, not quite yet finalized, of their vaccine mandate. And I was very concerned about this. First of all, because it just came down from on high at the Office of the President. And our committee, which had vetted all of the other COVID policies, was not consulted on this policy. That troubled me because it was very clear to me that of all the challenging things that we had dealt with, this was going to be the most ethically and the most publicly controversial of those policies. So why weren't we trying to hammer it out with the expertise that we had at the table and debate the merits of the policy? And it was basically, I was told that we're not going to talk about it in an effort to get a conversation going because I had serious concerns about the policy. I published a piece in the Wall Street Journal with a law professor from Notre Dame titled Why University Vaccine Mandates Are Unethical. And I focused on universities because folks may recall they were the first institutions to mandate the COVID shot before businesses were doing it, before other government entities were doing it.
Yeah.
They road tested it, ironically, at universities with young people, young students who were not at risk, significant risk from COVID. So that was my focus. And basically, I argued in that piece that this policy violated the principle of informed consent, which I had taught every year in the required ethics course to all of the medical students in the School of Medicine for many years. Lecture 2, informed consent, foundational principle of bulwark of 20th century medical ethics enshrined in the Nuremberg Code, which was designed to prevent the kind of abuses that we saw the German physicians committing during World War II, enshrined in the Helsinki Declaration of the World Medical Association, enshrined in federal law and something called the Common Rule. And it struck me as just very troublesome that we were tossing this foundational ethical principle overboard. Particularly for a product that by our own federal government's definition was still experimental, which made it even worse. I think it would have been problematic even if the product had full FDA approval and not just emergency use authorization. But it was even worse given that it was an experimental therapy.
Right. Now that's how the code, I believe, is written, that common code you talked about. I believe it's more specifically toward experimental situations.
That's correct. Yeah. The Common Rule governs human subjects research. But of course, there's also rules around informed consent in the ordinary practice of everyday medicine with routine therapies that patients have the right to decline, even if the doctor thinks it's going to be beneficial and even if it's FDA approved and so forth. So anyway, published this piece, passed it around the committee, couldn't get a conversation going. And then a week or two later, the university finalized their policy. And I had people reaching out to me because I had gone public at that point. Students reaching out to me saying, I recall one student who reached out saying, I don't feel that in good conscience I can submit a religious exemption because I'm not a religious person. Many people rediscovered their religious faith around that time. And I'm not calling into question anyone's sincerity in that regard, but this person was being scrupulously honest and saying, I can't in good conscience do that. But I have moral and conscience-based objections to taking this product, and I don't know what to do. I had nurses reaching out to me who had worked at UCI for decades, who'd worked side by side with me every day during the pandemic, who were going to get fired. I thought this is just a travesty. It's a grave injustice. And it's totally unnecessary. So I was just projecting ahead a few months to when I would teach that required ethics course and talk in lecture 2 about informed consent and talk in lecture 6 about moral integrity and doing the right thing under pressure, even when it might cost you something. And I just didn't feel like I could wake up with a clear conscience and try to teach these things to students if I had just stood by while this happened and not tried to do something about it. So I took the fateful step of challenging the university's vaccine mandate in federal court in a case that I did not end up prevailing on, although some of that was an issue of timing. About 9 months after my case was decided, the Ninth Circuit, which is the appellate court here in my district, made a ruling on a different vaccine mandate case related to the LA Unified School District, where the court said the 1905 precedent, which the courts have always relied on to try to justify vaccine mandates, a case called Jacobson v. Massachusetts, doesn't actually apply to the COVID shots because they're not sterilizing. They don't stop infection and transmission. So that particular public health argument doesn't really hold water. That was essentially one of the key arguments I made in my case that was endorsed by the appellate court. But by that time, it was too late to appeal my case. Basically, the statute of limitations had expired. So I didn't prevail in my case. But even before the court made a ruling in the case, the university placed me on what they called it, investigatory leave, then a month later on unpaid suspension, and then a month after that, they fired me. So they got rid of me as quickly as they could, allegedly for non-compliance with the very policy that I was challenging in federal court. But I think it was retaliatory because I know for a fact that they actually accommodated other faculty members
Right. Yeah.
You know, to
Somebody
work
must have
to
been accommodated.
I was already working remotely like 2/3 of my time. I was willing to go on sabbatical. I was willing to go down to part-time. I was willing to do full-time remote, not, you know, not to cause, I wasn't not trying to cause trouble for the university, but I was trying to change the policy. And I was trying to set a precedent in federal court that would also prevent these policies from being rolled out at other institutions. And I didn't succeed in that, but I think I did succeed in at least not violating my conscience and waking up with a clear conscience every day. But very quickly after that, I got swept up in the medical freedom movement, which the two of you are so, you know, deeply involved in, up in my home state of Washington, where I was born and raised. So, you know, I was fired in December of 21. A month later in January, I found myself in Washington, D.C., standing on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, talking to a crowd of 40,000 people at the first Defeat the Mandates rally.
Right.
You know, the freezing 20-degree weather, and, you know, looking down to my right and seeing a plaque on the ground saying, Martin Luther King Jr., 1964, I have a dream speech, right? Standing right here. And I'm looking out over the Washington Monument and this crowd of people and just wondering what happened to me. How did I get here? What's going on? You know, the next day I testified at Ron Johnson's Senate hearing. The day after that, I did a documentary film on medical freedom. So I made new friends. Yeah, I had some phone conversations with RFK Jr. about the issue of the childhood vaccine schedule and vaccine requirements here in California, where I live and practice medicine. So I knew Bobby a little bit, but through that medical freedom movement, got to know RFK Jr., got to know Jay Bhattacharya, who's now director of the NIH, Martin Kulldorff, who's now at Health and Human Services, and, you know, many other people who at the time we were just a ragtag group of COVID dissidents who had been exiled or fired from our jobs. You know, Martin was let go from his position at Harvard. I mean, he was a world-renowned epidemiologist, co-author of the Great Barrington Declaration with Jay. Jay was really being squeezed at the time at Stanford and retaliated against. He didn't end up losing his job there, but there was a campaign against him to try to affect that. And so it was a bit of a dizzying experience and definitely a professional change of venue for me. I mean, my plan was to retire at the university. I was in academic medicine for 16 years. I'm going to retire here. And, you know, my course was altered. In retrospect, I can say I think it was altered for the better. I don't regret what I did at all, even though it cost me something professionally. And it was a stressful period for myself and my family. My wife was working very part-time at one of our kids' schools, but I was really the sole breadwinner for my wife and my 5 children at the time. So yeah, that's a brief version of my COVID experience. And then from that, I got involved in some other legal fights related to medical freedom. So maybe I'll just mention briefly, there was a law that was passed in California called Assembly Bill 2098. And there were efforts in other states to pass similar legislation. This was essentially a gag order against physicians. So the law basically empowered the medical board to discipline or punish, including removal of medical license, any physician who contradicted the, quote, current scientific consensus on COVID. Well, current scientific consensus is not a well-defined medical or legal concept. Science is not based on consensus. It's based on evidence. It's based on hypothesis and conjecture and refutation. And, you know, you put a group of 12 real credible scientists with integrity in a room together, and what do? They argue endlessly, right? About the salience of this finding, or about the upshot of this study, or about, you know, what does the data as a whole suggest? That's what science is. Science is an ongoing debate. It's an ongoing conversation, especially on something totally novel, like a virus that the world had never seen before. And so essentially what this law did was to terrify any physician into, I'm just going to read a script from the California Department of Public Health, and I'm not going to deviate from that. Otherwise, they may take away my medical license. So with 4 other physicians, we filed a lawsuit against that bill. That was a case called Hogue v. Newsom. We immediately got a preliminary injunction against the law from the court. And the legislature and the governors kind of saw the writing on the wall that this law was going to be struck down as unconstitutional on 14th Amendment and First Amendment free speech grounds. And so they quietly repealed the law in the wake of that injunction.
They couldn't give you the victory.
Well, they didn't want to give us a victory in court. That's right. Which would have been nice to get. In fact, we petitioned the court to still decide the case. Because and not declare the case to be moot, because we said, well, what if they try to come back and do this again in 2 years? We want a court precedent, and the court decided not to do that in our case. So it's a victory in the sense that the law was repealed.
Right.
But I would hope that at some point, if another state tries to pull a stunt like this, that a federal court will make a precedent-setting ruling that basically says, no, you cannot restrict the free speech of physicians in this way.
And you weren't involved in the LAUSD lawsuit.
No, I was not. I mean, I know the folks that were involved in that. I'm friends with a lawyer who was involved in that case. So I wasn't directly involved as an expert witness in that case, although I've had plenty of conversations with the folks that were involved.
Because that was one, that was one that they took it off. They took the rule off. Mm-hmm. And so they said, there's no reason, there's no case. And so they declared it moot. But then after like 2 weeks, they put the policy back in place.
Tried it again. Right. And this is a common stunt to try to get out from under legal pressure. And, I would like the courts to have the integrity to recognize this and, have a judge who's got the gumption to be able to say, no, actually, I'm going to rule on the merits here, and not just because they're able to punt on a technicality, right? It's legally permissible to say that the case is moot and the people don't have standing because there's no harm being done. But it's also legally permissible, if the court believes that this kind of thing is going to happen, it is also legally permissible for them to rule. So the judge is not doing anything illegal when he decides to go that route, but he's doing something that's not always helpful, I would argue.
Yeah, I would argue too, but I can understand where the judges don't want to be overturned.
They don't. And so my experience with the courts is whenever they have the option to punt on a technicality, they'll almost always take it.
Right. Or they find a way to split the baby, as they say.
Yeah. And so I've been involved in a free speech case at the federal level as well, called Missouri v. Biden, which the government is settling with us now. So we're going to get at least a partial victory. I don't know all the terms of the settlement in that case, but we're going to get a partial victory in that case as well. And essentially that case was 2 states, Missouri and Louisiana, and 5 private plaintiffs, myself, formerly Jay Bhattacharya and Martin Koldorf, although they've since recused themselves because they're now working for the defendants. And a health freedom advocate named Jill Hines from Louisiana.
Jill Hines, she's been on our show a couple times.
Yeah, Jill's terrific. She's heart of gold. And then a journalist named Jim Hoff. So in this case, we're essentially alleging that the federal government, several agencies within the federal government, including the White House, were pressuring and coercing social media companies to censor disfavored information online. And initially, the case focused on COVID and election-related information because that's what we had evidence for. And so, all the private plaintiffs were censored because we challenged the government's preferred policies on vaccine mandates or mask mandates or lockdowns or prolonged school closures, things of that nature. But what we found on discovery in this case was that the government started with censorship related to the 2020 election, censorship related to COVID. And once they figured out that they could coerce Twitter and Facebook and YouTube on those issues, they began censoring on other issues as well. And so that the scope of the government-sponsored censorship expanded massively following the lockdowns, essentially in 2020. The infrastructure for doing that was put in place starting around 2017, but it really ramped up and was kind of utilized at full pitch during COVID.
Yeah, I think some of our listeners are familiar with the mechanisms, like you said, the structure being put in place, but I didn't know it was as early as 2017. Can you just highlight the structure and
Yeah.
the evidence that we finally found
So
about that system?
two things happened in 2016 that convinced elites that there was a problem that they had to address. The first was the election of Donald Trump, which was not supposed to happen. And the second was Brexit, the vote of the UK to exit the European Union, which was also not supposed to happen. So you had elites in many of our institutions here and abroad saying democracy is all fine and well, but we have to protect democracy from the demos, from the people, from these populist movements, people voting in ways that they're not supposed to. And so how are we going to do that? We're going to do that by controlling the flow of information, by controlling the information that they get. So in the waning days of the Obama administration, Obama stood up a new federal agency called CISA, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency. It's an agency that most people have not heard of, although if you pay attention to censorship, you may have heard of it. I like to ask people, how many federal agencies can you name? Usually it's about a dozen, 3-letter agencies for a well-informed American. Then I say, how many federal agencies are there supported by your taxpayer dollars? People are usually shocked to hear that there are 434. Well, one of those 434 that most people have never heard of is CISA. And CISA supposedly was supposed to protect our digital infrastructure from things like cyber attacks, which sounds like a sensible thing for a government agency to do. Their first director in 2017, Jen Easterly, who's one of the defendants in Missouri v. Biden, said, well, part of our remit, part of our mandate in protecting our critical infrastructure, our digital infrastructure, is to protect our election infrastructure. And you sort of say, well, okay, I mean, we are using voting machines, so you don't want those to be hacked. I guess I know what our election infrastructure is. And then she said, well, part of our protecting our election infrastructure is protecting our cognitive infrastructure. And then you sort of say, well, I think I know what our digital infrastructure is, and I probably know what our election infrastructure is. What is our cognitive infrastructure? Our cognitive infrastructure is literally the thoughts inside of your head.
Okay.
Which need to be protected from bad ideas, like things that, Aaron Kheriaty and Jay Bhattacharya and RFK Jr. and whoever is saying, your radio show probably would be in that category. And so how do we protect people's cognitive infrastructure? Through censorship and propaganda. So CISA very quickly became the central node in the government censorship apparatus through which all censorship demands were funneled to social media platforms. They set up quasi-private entities. I call them quasi-private because they looked like they were NGOs or independent research institutes at places like Stanford. Stanford has something called the Stanford Internet Observatory. The University of Washington has one, Digital Forensics Lab, or whatever it is that they call it. These are not academic research institutes. These are full-time censorship operations. They hire interns. They were set up at the behest of the government. They're funded by federal government grants, including the National Science Foundation. And they're staffed by many former government employees, including former employees of CISA.
Okay.
And they basically do CISA's bidding. So they scrape the internet 24/7 to find out who and what needs to be censored. Then they funnel those, basically spreadsheets with all the accounts that need to be throttled today to CISA. That goes to the social media company with the heavy fist of the government behind it. Do this or else. And then the censorship happens.
Dr. Kheriaty, you probably didn't take a class in law very much back when you were.
I did not. I've had a crash course in real life. Yeah.
You might have an honorary Juris Doctor now.
I feel like I'm getting there. I've learned a lot about First Amendment jurisprudence, about free speech and the Constitution, about the 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause, and so forth. So it has been an education. We can debate whether or not private platforms should or should not be able to censor. It's an interesting legal debate. I think they should not be, but there's an argument to be made. But no one doubts, and no one should be able to argue that the federal government cannot engage in censorship. That's a clear violation of Americans' First Amendment rights. That's why in the preliminary injunction that we got from the district court judge in Missouri v. Biden, the judge said, if what plaintiffs allege is true, this is the worst free speech violation in United States history. That was a ruling he issued on
Right.
July 4, 3 years ago.
Right.
Right.
And that's
I thought
because
the case was going to be sealed and shut by that point.
so
Those
did I. And
solid
again,
words.
we went to the Supreme Court on that injunction, not on the case as a whole, but just on the injunction. And they sort of punted on a technicality. I don't know that I need to get down into the weeds on that, but the Supreme Court punted on the injunction. The case went back to the district court, for a final ruling, and the government is settling the case right now. So we're going to get at least a partially good outcome in that case. We may not get everything that we want in terms of, putting protections in place, but I think we'll get something that will be precedent setting and helpful. And we got the issue on the radar screen of Americans. So between something called the Twitter files, which was Elon Musk opening up some backdoor communication channels to independent journalists, and Michael Schellenberger, Matt Taibbi, Barry Weiss, and others publishing information about essentially what we were alleging in our case. That came out concurrently with our documents on discovery. And we were basically able to prove that there was this censorship apparatus that was systematically violating the constitutional rights of Americans. So it became an issue, for example, in the vice presidential debate between Waltz and J.D. Vance, the last question that the interviewer put to Vance was, don't you think because of January 6th that the man that you're running with is a threat to democracy? And his response was, I think the real threat to democracy is the government-sponsored censorship that's been happening on an industrial scale for the last several years. That was a direct reference to
That's right.
our case, which was going to the Supreme Court at that moment, and was bringing the issue to the attention of Americans. So I like to tell people it's important to fight in the courts, not just to try to get a legal victory, but also because we have to win in the court of public opinion. And fighting in the courts is one way of bringing attention to an issue and being able to educate people on the issue. Even if you don't always get the outcome that you want from the judge in the case, you do get information on discovery that you might not have been able to obtain any other way, right? So that can be really important just in terms of transparency and telling people, this is what's going on. Anything we got on our case, we were able to publish. And I published several articles in, again, the Wall Street Journal, Tablet Magazine, and elsewhere talking about, look, this is how this whole censorship Leviathan is working. Here's how it's built. Here's the history behind it. And here's what it's doing. And so that kind of work, I think, is important for the medical freedom movement. That kind of work is important for attempts to defend our constitutional rights. When the legislatures seem impotent to do the right thing, sometimes you have to fight in the courts. And you don't always get a judge that's fair-minded and willing to look at the evidence. But even then, you can get information. And information is helpful when you're trying to fight a battle that has to do with the truth.
Yeah, and some of it,
I mean, ultimately, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about trying to get the truth out there and trying to present people with evidence and get them to, sort of lower their defenses and overcome some of their emotional or cognitive biases and just assess evidence on its own merits. That's all that people in this movement, I think, are asking of others. And we all have our own opinions, and not everyone's going to agree with us, and even people within the medical freedom movement have differences of opinion on various questions. That's good. I mean, that's something I think to be celebrated, in fact. But the shared pursuit of truth is so important. I'll tell you another reason why it was important for me to fight, both on the medical freedom side of things, that the law that was trying to intervene in the doctor-patient relationship and prevent doctors from telling patients what they actually believed, but also the general free speech fight of people being able to express their opinions on social media. I've made a study, among other things, of the 20th century totalitarianisms. And I've been influenced by the thought of one political philosopher in particular, a man named Eric Voegelin, who looked at totalitarianism. He looked at Nazism in Germany. He looked at Soviet communism. He looked at Italian fascism. And he asked the question, what do all of these oppressive, disastrous systems have in common? And he said the common feature of all of these ideologies, because there are differences between these ideologies. The common feature is not concentration camps and gulags. It's not barbed wire fences. It's not mass surveillance, although we had mass surveillance during the pandemic too, actually. It's not men in jackboots. It's not any of these things. He said the common feature of all totalitarian systems, and the starting point, is the prohibition of questions. The regime monopolizes what counts as knowledge, what counts as rationality, what counts as truth. And if you raise your hand and you ask any inconvenient questions, they don't sit down and debate with you, right? The communist ideologue does not sit down and debate with you about the proletarian revolution. They just say you're infected with bourgeois consciousness. You're by definition irrational. You're not invited into polite conversation, and you need to shut up.
So they shame the questioner.
They shame the questioner, and if that doesn't work, then they'll employ force. Then that's when the men in jackboots and the barbed wire fences and the concentration camps come in. But the starting point is always the prohibition of questions, the denial of our shared rationality. You're not allowed to speak. You're not allowed to raise your hand and say, "Well, I don't know. Kids don't really seem to be harmed by COVID. Does it make sense to keep the schools closed for months and months?" I may not be an epidemiologist or a virologist, but the idea that a cloth mask can stop an aerosolized virus just doesn't make sense to me. You're not allowed to do that, right? You're told to shut up. You're told not only to shut up, but you're dangerous. And you're going to be punished if you keep asking questions. That is the road to totalitarianism. And that's why alarm bells went off for me when I began to experience censorship, because I know where that eventually leads. I'm not claiming that we're living in a totalitarian society. I'm not even claiming that during COVID, we were living in a totalitarian society, although I think we went a scary distance in that direction. I am claiming that we embraced the fundamental starting point of all totalitarian societies, and we ran with it very vigorously a long ways down that road. And that is terrifying. That's a really frightening thing for society to fall into. And we did it out of fear. We did it because we were subjected not only to massive levels of censorship that gave us what Jay Bhattacharya calls the illusion of consensus. It was an illusion because there were actually debates about all these questions, but one side of the debate was silence. So we were subjected to censorship, which gave the illusion of consensus, and we were subjected to massive fear-based propaganda that was designed precisely to make us more afraid.
And I think both Lisa and I learned as we were at the steps of the Capitol trying to reopen Washington, and our colleagues would bring signs from the 6 steps of totalitarianism, I think from Saul Alinsky. And the first one is control their health. If you remember that socialist kind of formula.
I do. Yeah, Rules for Radicals.
Years and years
I've read
ago.
it.
Control their health. Well, we're here. They're trying to control our health.
I mean, look, if you can, on pain of losing their job, on pain of getting kicked out of school, on pain of being socially marginalized, force people to inject something into their bodies, you can do anything to people. You can do anything to people.
That's really what I think Informed Choice Washington exists for, and so many other groups across the country and even the world is, first of all, the truth. They're not using the full truth and the range of outcomes from some of these procedures. And the alternative is, if they do get that access, if Jacobson v. Mass is turned into a license to inject, we've lost a lot of freedom.
Yeah. My first instance of censorship, actually, interesting because she resides in Washington and was punished by Washington State for doing this. So when John Sauer, who's the lead attorney in Missouri v. Biden, called me, some of our listeners may know that name. He was Solicitor General of Missouri at the time. Now he's Solicitor General of the United States. So our case has been pilfered by the other side since we filed it. But he's a brilliant attorney. He called me. He said, "Aaron, you've been censored during COVID, right? Because we're thinking of cooking up this lawsuit, and we need some private plaintiffs. And I said, yeah. The first example I gave him was after I filed my lawsuit, but before I was fired, the first person who interviewed me was an independent journalist named Allison Morrow.
Oh,
Just for you to have her on if you don't know Allison. But she used to be at CBS and then left mainstream journalism and worked for the state of Washington Department of Natural Resources.
Correct.
And so she did an interview with me, and we actually didn't even talk about vaccine safety and efficacy.
You're the one.
In that interview. I'm the one. Yeah, I'm the guy
That's right,
that got
yeah.
her into hot water. My interview with Allison focused only on the ethical and legal aspects of mandates, which was my area of expertise as a medical ethicist. I have safety and efficacy concerns about the COVID shots, but I didn't discuss those in that interview. I only focused on the ethical and legal aspects of vaccine mandates. And YouTube censored the interview, suspended her account, and then her employer, the state of Washington, told her, unless you also take down your interview with Kheriaty from all the other platforms where it's still posted, we're going to fire you. And to her credit, or however you want to characterize it, she stood her ground and said, no, I'm not going to do that. And they did end up firing her. So again, very surreal. In short order, I got fired. The first person I talked to about my case got fired. It was very dizzying and actually quite frightening that society could turn the corner so quickly on civil liberties and on just basic human decency and do this to people. And it felt like the seeds of totalitarianism had been planted.
Right. Yeah. And especially the way you've described it, it was right there. Did you think that there were true forces behind the scenes that were plucking you and Allison out?
Yeah. It seemed clear to me that, there was this fierce need to punish anyone who put their head above the parapet, because that sets an example for other people.
Right.
That's the only way to maintain total silence is by punishing people. And that's exactly what happened. I recall just talking years later to other doctors here in Orange County, California, where I practiced, who weren't even at UCI hospital where I worked, just other hospitals locally. And them talking about how after you were fired, it's just this climate of fear descended upon all of the medical staff at my hospital too. It was like everyone knew about it. Nobody wanted to talk about it, and everyone kept their head down. So it doesn't take too many public examples like that. And, my case was very public. It was front page of the LA Times, university ethics professor fired for challenging the ethics of university's policy. It was kind of a headline. And so I think there was a need to make a public example out of people. That's a very effective way to bring other people in line.
Yeah.
And there was also the ability, because there was a conflict of interest operating at the federal level. And that's that of our federal agencies, the CDC is there to give recommendations. Their recommendations become mandates, which is a problem, but they are there to give recommendations. The FDA is there to approve new products. The NIH is there to fund research. But the most powerful man at the NIH, Anthony Fauci, who basically controlled the purse strings of 85% of biomedical research in the United States.
Wow.
Was also on the White House Coronavirus Task Force, and he became the public face of the federal government's COVID recommendations. And so no researcher at any research institution in the United States, including universities, wanted to publicly contradict or challenge or question the policies that were coming out of the White House, because Anthony Fauci could turn off their funding and ruin their career. And that wasn't just a theoretical possibility. It's well documented that he has done this in a retaliatory way to other researchers in the past. Happened during the HIV/AIDS epidemic, where if you contradicted his theory about AIDS or his approach, or you challenged, what he took to be the right hypotheses, that he would retaliate against you by basically ruining your career. And the way you ruin someone's career who's a researcher is you dry up their funding.
Right.
And so he never should have been in a position in which he was making any recommendations, because that effectively allowed him to silence not only individuals, but also the institutions that relied on that grant funding, who, would fall into line in order to keep the NIH dollars flowing.
Right.
And that's
Yeah,
why I
something-
think you didn't see any resistance from the universities. It was like, you say jump, we say how high, and nobody's going to ever ask any questions. That's why it was important to punish me.
Yeah, I've heard that phrase "chilling of speech" come up a lot in
Yeah.
the First Amendment cases, and that talk about chilling speech. Yeah, you're going to lose, funding for 100 scientists in your department or in your other kind of government study organization. Yeah, that's a big pressure.
Just for the University of California alone, I don't have the number at my fingertips of NIH funding per year, but it's billions of dollars. It's a lot of money that flows to the university, every year. And universities literally would collapse without that. I mean, that's not an exaggeration. It's an existential threat to them if they get on the wrong side of federal funding.
Aaron, I really appreciate that history. That's amazing. And certainly all of our listeners have been, tracking you and all the situation. And so we appreciate that. Now we've got the bookends. We've had Allison Morrow on our show before.
Great.
And so now I forgot that now we've got the bookends of this chapter. And I'm so sorry for both of you. And we have so many people and other people from the other departments in the Washington State executive branch who've been fired. They called out to us. They wanted some legal help. They couldn't get their EEOC complaint filed in time, et cetera. Just lots of tragedy. And so, again, you're a public face of trying to right this wrong, and I really appreciate that. But we also want to leave you time to talk about your book.
Thank you. So
your latest book.
Yeah, my latest book. I have two books that I could mention. If folks are interested in hearing more about the things we've already talked about, I did write a book a couple of years ago called The New Abnormal. The subtitle is The Rise of the Biomedical Security State. And that's not only my account of what happened to us during COVID, but how those mechanisms of control, I worry, are going to be used in the future. So the book is about what happened to us during those years, but it's also about how those things might be used down the road. So I still think it's timely and relevant, even if people don't want to really think or talk about COVID anymore. They'd rather put it in the rearview mirror.
A lot of us want to collect those books because we don't want this to happen again, and to prove that the chapters, as the realizations start to dawn on the mainstream eventually. Yeah, this body of knowledge needs to be corrected.
That's part of why I documented it there. People ask me, do I think there's going to be a reckoning now? I don't. I think it's going to take one more generation to get that. I think the generation of high school and college students that were harmed during COVID are going to want a reckoning. I think, unfortunately, our generation, there's just too many people that were complicit in the hysteria and in the harms, and
they don't want to be wrong.
They don't want to be wrong. But I think it's important to document so that 20, 30 years from now, people can look back and say, no, okay, there were some people that stood up. There were some people that noticed what was going on. The other book you mentioned, which just came out more recently, is a book I'm very proud of and very happy to see finally in print. It's called Making the Cut. How to Heal Modern Medicine is the subtitle. And the book is three things. Number one, it's a memoir of my medical training, of my time in medical school. And I really try to take the reader and place them at the bedside, place them in the operating room, help them to see how beautiful and exciting it is actually to practice medicine. I fell in love with medicine. I love the practice of medicine, and medicine is such a beautiful thing. And it's heartbreaking when you see something you love not living up to its ideals. And so the book is a memoir of why I fell in love with medicine, and that the harrowing experiences involved in medical training. But it's also in that context articulating my own philosophy of medicine. And with that in mind, it's a stringent critique of contemporary medicine and what I think has gone wrong with contemporary medicine, with some suggestions at the end, based on my diagnosis of, what the treatment plan might be for the patient, and using that metaphor, the patient being medical institutions themselves that have become sick, that have veered from their mandate toward healing and tailoring care to the needs of the sick individual. So it's a bit of a what went wrong with medicine. I think it's very congenial to, the Make America Healthy Again movement and many of the issues that have come to the fore, in recent years, that the medical freedom movement, the MAHA movement, the folks that have been raising concerns about vaccine safety for many, many years. My book provides a perspective on how did we get here, and what needs to happen in medicine in order to correct course, and how might we try to go about doing that. So yeah, Making the Cut: How to Heal Modern Medicine. I think it's a book that will hopefully engage readers. I mean, there's some beautiful patient stories in there, and stories of healing, and there's also a pretty stringent and sobering critique of what's wrong with contemporary healthcare. And the book has been 23 years in the making. I wrote many of the patient stories immediately after completing medical school, almost a quarter century ago.
Wow.
And the more mature philosophy of medicine, critique of contemporary medicine in the book is writing that I've done more recently in the last couple of years. And so this book is a long labor of love for me. And I wrote it because I still love medicine. I still care about medicine. Even if my lover has turned prostitute, I'm heartbroken.
I saw that reference
because I love her. Right. So, so I hope folks like the book. I think there's some edifying stuff in the book. It's not all doom and gloom. It's not all a downer. It is a love story at the end of the day. And it's a plea, it's a call for us to try to recover and reconfigure contemporary healthcare institutions precisely so that we can recover the idea of health and healing that medicine at its best, should be embracing.
Yeah, Lisa, do you want to ask a question?
Oh, sure. What would modern medicine look like to you were it healed?
So one of the analogies I use late in the book is, after my stringent diagnosis, you kind of come away with the sense that the institutional forces within contemporary medicine that are causing many of the problems are so deeply entrenched that reform from within would be difficult, if not impossible. So what do you do in that circumstance? And speaking of totalitarianisms, I draw on a concept that was developed by Czech dissidents in the 1970s that were living under Soviet communism. A man named Václav Benda came up with the idea of what he called the parallel polis.
Okay, we're wrapping up here, Aaron. Sorry, that way you don't have to spoil the book.
So a little teaser is that we need to develop parallel medical institutions. Mm-hmm. And if you read the closing chapters of the book, you'll see, I'll try to unpack for you what I mean by that.
Beautiful.
All right, thank you so much. Your website, Aaron Kheriaty?
AaronKheriaty.com. I have a Substack as well called Human Flourishing, where people can find my writing and my other interviews. I'm on X, Twitter, Aaron Kheriaty, MD.
We so appreciate you. Thank you. You've been listening to Inform Life Radio on KKNW in the Puget Sound area. We'll be back next week with Bernadette and chemtrails as your subject. Have a great weekend, everybody.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, listeners.
Informed Choice Washington is a nonprofit organization that advocates for healthy immunity, medical freedom, and fully informed medical consent. The right to make medical choices without coercion is fundamental to our civil liberties and a basic principle in all human rights declarations. To learn more, tune in each Friday from 4 to 5 p.m. to An Informed Life Radio and visit the website informedchoicewa.org. It's time to take a stand for medical freedom. Go to informedchoicewa.org today.
Did you know that solutions containing iodine can inactivate viruses in the nose and throat in 15 seconds? And hydrogen peroxide can do it in under 30 seconds. Decades of studies, including many conducted during COVID, have shown that properly prepared and used nasal spray and gargling solutions can reduce your risk of infection, reduce viral load, reduce symptoms, and reduce transmission of viruses. To learn more, go to healthyimmunitynow.org and check out the EFU Challenge. Why spread fear and infection when nature provides solutions? Go to healthyimmunitynow.org today.
The information contained in this episode is for informational purposes only. No material is intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment.